All right, welcome back. The next piece of equipment that we're going to look at is the bandsaw. And the bandsaw is a very versatile piece of equipment, and it's also quite easy to use. But there are some safety features that we need to be aware of before we start cutting. So let's have a quick look. And before I do anything, I'm going to put my glasses back on. All right, so the bandsaw has a one metal blade that's a continuous loop, and we'll have a look at that later. And it's driven by an electric motor. Just like we do with all of our tools, while we do these adjustments and safety preps, we're going to make sure that our saw is unplugged. So I'm going to leave that right there for now. Some of the big things that you need to know about the bandsaw is that it has a platform. The platform can be tilted. All right, different angles. And the adjustments for that are right here. So you can tilt it forwards and back and things like that to cut a different angle. For today's demo, we're going to do this on a flat 90-degree surface. And we're going to look at some things. So obviously the blade is here. This bandsaw is designed to cut curves. The thicker the blade, a less of a curve that you can do. The thinner the blade, the tighter curve that you can do. So we have a pretty standard 4 to 5 tips per inch or teeth per inch on this blade. So it's a pretty aggressive blade. It's going to be kind of like for doing general things, nothing specific. Some things to note, there is a throat plate here that you can actually pop up if you need to change the blade. Okay. But that again is red to indicate that that's a danger area. So you want to keep your fingers out of that area. Another thing that we need to know is that there is a guard for the blade. Right now for this demo, I have it very high. You don't want to keep it high. There are some blade guides here, and there's a ball bearing that you can't see that keep this blade in line. But generally speaking, you only need to expose as much blade as you need to cut the stock that you're using. Okay, that's a general kind of thing. That goes for the table saw, that goes for any other saw that we're doing. So we only want to expose about a 1/4 of an inch over the stock that we're using. Okay, so this is a 5/8 inch piece of plywood. So I have just raised the guard a tiny bit above that. I'm estimating a 1/4 inch right there. Then I'm going to make sure that the guide is tight. Okay, so you can see now that we only have as much blade as needed to cut the piece of wood or piece of stock that we're doing. That's pretty much it for setting up the bandsaw. Now that I have those safety things in place and I have my piece of stock, I'm okay to plug this in. Okay, we're back. I have plugged in the saw and we're ready to go. So just some things about the stock, okay? Again, this saw will cut in curves, all right, and splines and things like that. So basically, I'm just going to make a nice little arc with my pencil, okay, and that's going to be my guide. And I'm going to pretend that this is something that I need to cut to fabricate, all right? One thing to note about the blade, that it is going in a clockwise direction, and you can see that the teeth are pointing down. Again, this is going to put pressure between the piece of stock and the platform, and it's going to make sure that it doesn't bounce around, okay? So that's another safety feature. And as we go through other tools, you'll see that that's typically the case, that the blade is pushing down on the stock. All right, so I'm going to get this ready. I'm going to make sure that I have enough room to manipulate this piece. That's another safety feature. You don't want this banging into things and getting in the way. I'm going to kind of line it up where I want to. And you're going to push down on this piece of stock with your fingers, and you're going to push with your thumbs on the edge. Okay? So push with your thumbs on the edge, and you're going to make sure at the same time that you're staying out of this red zone on the throat plate, okay, as much as possible. And if you do have smaller pieces that you need to do, then there are jigs and safety procedures that we can make to make that safer. We won't go over that in this video. That would be something that we do live in the shop. All right, so I'm going to start this up and I'm going to cut this piece. All right, so now I have it lined up. I'm going to make sure, again, this is another kind of general safety tip. I'm going to make sure that my piece of stock is not touching the blade when I start the saw. If I do touch the piece of stock off the blade when it's starting, that's going to cause some kickback, and that's going to be a point where an injury may occur. So I'm going to make sure my piece of stock is away from the blade before I begin. And I'm going to start the saw up. It's going to be a bit loud. And then I'm going to just follow this line, okay? And I'll show you the curve. Okay. All right, so you can see that I let the blade stop and then I moved the pieces away. The curve wasn't perfect, but again, it's going to be very hard to follow, exactly that curve perfectly because I drew it with a pencil and I didn't draw it with an instrument, but then you can shape it after that. All right, so that's one way that we can manipulate that saw and cut a piece. There's one other thing that you need to know about manipulating the blade in a piece of stock, and we'll cover that right now. All right, so we've completed that one cut and we've shown you how it can do a curve. There's only one other safety feature that you really need to know about, and that's when you get into a tight curve and you can't get out, all right? So basically, you don't want to get into a situation where you're trying to back up a piece of stock with the bandsaw blade moving, because it's very flexible and it can break if you force it out of a tight corner while the blade is moving. So I'm going to demo that, the safe way to take that out and then to start again. Okay, so we'll do that right now. Okay, so you can see that I've gotten into a spot in the cut where I'm not satisfied and it's very deep in and there's multiple curves here. So I have stopped the saw completely and then I'm going to work the blade out, because you can see as I'm working this blade out, it is actually bending, and if that blade is actually moving when you're doing that, the chances of it breaking are very great. Okay, so that is the bandsaw. There's not much to the bandsaw, but there are some very key points, especially about keeping the guard just above your stock, making sure that your fingers are away from the throat plate and the moving blade, and knowing the limitations of the blade and the curves that you can cut and how to remove a blade that's stuck in the middle of a cut.